And now, without further ado, still Jewish, after all these years, ladies and gentlemen, would you please welcome to the stage, Hoffman!
I'm back! I've played a lot of theaters, and I travel on the road, and I carry all my props along. Which, believe me, is a load. Every night, a strange cafe, a strange hotel, and then, early in the morning, I am on the road again. When the season's over, and my lonesome journey ends, that's the only time I see my family and my friends. I drive up Henry Hudson Parkway, and before I stop the car, my mom leans out the window and she hollers, "Here we are." Shake hands with your Uncle Max, my boy. Here's your sister Cheryl. And there's your cousin Isabel, that's Irving's oldest girl. And you remember the Tishman twins, Gerald and Jerome. They've all come out to greet you and to wish you welcome home. Meet Marowitz, Barowitz, Handelman, Schandelman, Sperber and Gerber and Steiner and Stone, Moskowitz, Lupowitz, Aronson, Berenson, Hyman and Feynman and Friedman and Cohn, Swallowitz, Wallowitz, Teitelbaum, Mandelbaum, Levin, Levinsky, Levine and Levi, Brumberger, Schlumberger, Minkus and Binkus, Stein with an E-I. And Stein with a Y. Shake hands with your Uncle Saul, my boy. There is your brother Sid. Oh, and there is your cousin Yetta, who expects another kid. Whenever you're on the road, my boy, wherever you may roam, we'll all be here when you come back to wish you welcome home. Thank you. It's good to be back home in New York City after all these years. I saw my old rabbi in the shul last night. He seemed so glad to see me. I just smiled. And then we complained about our ailments, and we talked about our fears. Still Jewish after all these years. Oh, still Jewish after all these years. I saw my old Moyle in my dream last night. His hands were really shaking. I just screamed. A Moyle. You know what that is, right? That's a guy who does circumcisions. Ooh. Ah, there it is. My last New York Times review. 1998. The last time I performed in New York City. My hometown. The one I left behind. The one I ran away from. I mean, how do you live up to that? I mean, what does that even mean anyway? A sage, a rabbi, a professor, a judge, I don't know, maybe a lawyer could be a sage. You know, my mother always wanted me to be a lawyer, but who ever heard of a Jewish lawyer? See, because I was born I was born acting. Literally. Born acting. I was born Avrom Ber Hoffman on March 3rd, 1958, in the Royal Hospital on the Grand Concourse in the beautiful borough known as the Bronx. And my mother is 4'11" tall. And they told her that she was too petite to have natural childbirth, so they had to schedule a cesarean section, which back in those days was a pretty serious, operation. The day before the surgery, the doctor called my mother in a panic. He said, "Mrs. Hoffman, we have a very serious complication. I have a golf game scheduled for tomorrow." So they had to reschedule for March 3rd, 1958. Now, what I didn't mention is that the Royal Hospital was actually a teaching hospital. So there were 25 medical students present at my birth, learning how to perform a cesarean section. They wheeled my mother into the surgical theater. The doctor took the scalpel, he made the incision very carefully, and he pulled out this little baby. This cute little baby. Very cute little baby. He showed me to all the medical students. They applauded. And I took my first bow. And I was hooked. I actually gave my first public performance when I was still in diapers. The year was 1960. It was a time of great social upheaval here in America, civil rights and Martin Luther King. But I was just a little baby, a little Jewish baby. I didn't know about any of that. And my parents, like most good Jewish parents, used to make their annual pilgrimage to the holiest Jewish site in America, Miami Beach. The 6th borough.
Yeah!
The magic city. And, we were too poor to fly, so we had to drive down. And those of you old enough to remember, there was no I-95 back then. It was US 1, all the way from New York down to Florida. It took us 5 days. And we had to stop to eat along the way. So my father decided to stop one day somewhere in the middle of deepest, whitest Georgia. And I thought that would be a perfect opportunity to entertain all of those nice, white Georgian folks. I was a very precocious little baby, you could probably tell. So I got up in the middle of the restaurant with my full diaper, and I started to sing what was probably back then my favorite song in the whole world. We shall overcome. We shall over. We made it out alive, but just barely. So I became a snowbird baby. Every time it got a little bit too cold here in New York, my entire family, my mommy, my tati, my bobby, my zaidi, and thousands of Jews from New York used to escape, run away, down to the Jewish Mecca of South Florida. Now, those of you who may have seen my first 2 shows, you know that I'm a child of Holocaust survivors who dedicated their lives to the preservation of the Jewish culture and specifically the Yiddish language. I didn't learn to speak English until I went to public school. My first and only language was Yiddish. And so by the time I was about 4 years old, I was ready to pursue my career because I just wanted to be an actor. But there was just one little problem. There wasn't a lot of demand for 4-year-old Yiddish speakers. So my mother decided to write a little show that I could star in. She called it Aleph Avremel. And it was all about this little boy, this cute little boy, this very cute little boy, who goes off into the forest looking for adventures, and he happens to come across this big, angry, bear. Now, Aleph, for those of you who may not know, is the first letter in the Hebrew and the Yiddish alphabet. It's also the first letter in my name. Avi, Avrom, Avremel. Aleph, Avremo. And Bays is the second letter in the Yiddish alphabet, the first letter in the word bear. And do any of you here know what the Yiddish word Bays means?
Angry.
Angry, that's right. Bays. Ah, bin Bays, I'm angry. Right? So Aleph and Bays are the first two letters of the Yiddish alphabet. And the whole show was basically a lesson in the Yiddish language. Aleph Avremel ist gegangen in den Wald. Beis hat a Bär in der See, dorten Wald. And then the bear says, Nyam, 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 Avremel. Du bist doch a Siesinke. You're so sweet. Nyam, nyam, nyam. Du bist doch a Gittinke. You're so good. Nyam, nyam, nyam. Ich kenn dich essen. I could eat you up. Thanks, Mom. Now, my mother was born in a slave labor camp in Siberia, and my grandparents suffered under the Stalinist regime in the Gulag. So I think this was my mother's way of not only writing a show for me to star in, but also kind of a show with an anti-communist message, right? Think about it. The big, angry communist bear who wants to destroy the brave little Jew who takes his big axe and he chops up that bear into tiny little pieces and he feeds him to all the other letters of the alphabet. It's funny about Jewish shows. It always comes back around to food. See, but I was the star of the show. And thus, thus began my Meshugana life in the theater. When I was about 6 years old, my parents took me to my first Broadway show. It was an obscure little musical. You've probably never heard of it. It was called Fiddler on the Roof. God, I love that show. I memorized every line, every lyric, every song. Now, I don't know how many of you are aware of the fact that when Fiddler on the Roof opened out of town, the reviews were mixed. You know, apparently a lot of the critics thought that the show was a little too Jewish for general consumption. Little did they know that Fiddler would go on to become one of the most popular shows of all time. Produced in almost every country, almost every language in the world. My favorite, of course, is the Japanese version. Ho! Shikatari! Ho! Shikatari! Ho! 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 Shikatari! You can actually go on YouTube and watch the videos of the Japanese fiddler. It's great fun, I promise. You'll have a great time. When I was 8 years old, the community center on Hillman Avenue in the Bronx decided to do an all-children's version of Fiddler on the Roof. And who do you think they got to play Tevye? Who? Me! I became the 8-year-old Zero Mostel with a Bronx accent. And because my mother recorded everything that I ever did, what you are about to hear is the actual recording of my portrayal of Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof at the Hillman Avenue Community Center in the Bronx in 1966.
Many poor people. I realize, of course, that it's no shame to be poor, but it's no great honor either. So what would have been so terrible if I had a small fortune? If I were a rich man, all day long I'd bitty bitty bum. It would go well, and oh, wouldn't have to work hard.
Boy, what a hand. Not bad for an 8-year-old, though. 35 years later, I got to play Tevye again, under very different circumstances. But I'll tell you about that later. So by now I was about 10 years old, and the word had gotten out that there was this little boy in the Bronx who spoke Yiddish, wanted to be an actor. And that's when I got the call. The oldest and most respected Yiddish theater in New York at the time was called the Volksbühne. And they heard about me, and they called to ask me if I would be willing to be a part of their upcoming production of a show called Bronx Express, 1968. How could I say no? I was 10 years old, my first professional job in New York City in the Yiddish theater. They offered me the role of young Yossele Hungerstolz. This was a typical Yiddish melodrama, all about a tailor from the old country who he lives up in the Bronx, and he takes the subway, the Bronx Express, every day to go down to work. He schleps all the way down to the Lower East Side to the sweatshop, where he sits behind a sewing machine all day and into the night. And then after dark, he gets back on the Bronx Express, and he schleps all the way back to his home to share his meager earnings with his poor, poor family. It's a little bit of a socialist theme running through this, right? So one day he's on the subway going to work, and he looks up and he sees a man come onto the subway car dressed in a fur hat and a fur coat with diamonds on his fingers. And he recognizes him as a friend from the old country who came with him to America. He says, Moshe? Oi Gott in den Himmel, Moshe, General kick off die. America has done very well by you. And Moshe turns to his old friend and he says, don't call me Moshe. My name now is Maximilian. Look at you, you've done nothing with your life. Leave your family behind those greenhorns. What do you need them for? Come with me. Come with me to Wall Street, and I will make you rich and famous. And somehow the character playing my father thinks this is a good idea, right? So he leaves his poor family behind, and he goes off to Wall Street, seeking fame and fortune. This is where I come in. So now young Yossele Hungerstolz becomes the primary breadwinner for the family. And you know, back in those days, the only way a young boy could make any kind of a living was to shine shoes on the dirty streets of New York. You see where this is going, right? So there I am, shining shoes somewhere down on Wall Street, as depicted by this magnificent set design. And I'm shining shoes, and I look up and I realize that I'm shining the shoes of my own father. I mean, what could be more melodramatic than that, right? I will never forget my lines. Tate, das bin ich, dein Sindale, Yossele. Papa, Papa, this is me, your son, Yossele. Oi, Tate, du kennst mich nicht. Papa, don't you recognize me? Oi, Tate, hast du uns im Ganzen vergessen? Have you forgotten us completely? Oi, Tate. Tate, komm mal heim, komm zurück, come home, come back. Tate, komm zurück zu deinem Sprüche, come back to your family. Oi, Tate. Thank you. Not bad for a 10-year-old, right? And for that portrayal, I actually received my first New York Times review. The New York Times said, Avremele Hoffman displays a sense of humor. to show you can't believe everything that you read in the New York Times. But that was my first professional job in New York, in the Yiddish theater. 10 years old, I was ready to be a star on Broadway. My father had other ideas. He comes into the house in the summer of 1969, and he announces that he has decided, unilaterally, that the family is leaving the Bronx behind and we are moving halfway across the world to Syosset. No, just kidding. Literally halfway across the world to Israel. 3 weeks later, we were all packed up and on a plane bound for Tel Aviv. Now, I didn't speak a word of Hebrew, but because of my Yiddish, it only took me about 6 months to learn the language fluently. Within a year, I was doing children's theater. Within 2 years, I had already made 2 educational television series, which are shown to this day in the state of Israel. And by the time I was 13 years old, I got cast in a major motion picture starring an award-winning actor from England. I'm sure you all remember him. His name was Richard Harris. Remember Richard Harris? He came to Israel to make a movie. And I auditioned, and I got a small part.
Because you say so! Grab the ball!
Yeah, that's it. In case you blinked, you might have missed it. Here it is again.
Because you say so! Grab the ball!
Where's the ball? Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to thank the Academy. Amazing. Richard Harris. My first movie. Now, he directed and starred in that movie. It was called Bloomfield. And that film is recognized to this day as one of the 10 worst films ever made. It was awful. But I was in it. By the time I was 15, I was already working in the professional theater in Israel. I'd done several pretty big shows. I was working on a sitcom at the time called My Son the Doctor. And I will never forget Yom Kippur, 1973, the day the war broke out. Now, I'd never been in a war before. This was a totally new and scary experience. Now, those of you who've never been to Israel, it's a tiny, tiny little country. And at a time of crisis, everyone comes together. And the professional theaters are obligated to send their shows to the front lines in a time of war to entertain the troops, to keep their morale up. I was 15, and they put us on a bus, and they sent us up to the Golan Heights on the border of Syria, on the front lines, in the middle of the war. There were bombs going off in the distance, bullets whizzing by. Nothing changes. You know, what I remember most about growing up in Israel was the freedom that we had, the extraordinary education that we received. But I was a teenager, and all I really cared about was my rock and roll music. You know, I wanted to be a rock star. So I started a rock band, and we sang all the great songs of the period, which, ironically, I found out were written mostly by nice Jewish boys. People like Bob Dylan, and Paul Simon, and Billy Joel, and the countless others who were writing songs not for Jews, but for an entire generation. So if you'll indulge me, this is my tribute to my Jewish rock and roll roots. I saw my old lover on the street last night. She seemed so glad to see me, I just smiled. And we talked about some old times, and we drank ourselves some beers. Still crazy after all these years. Oh, still crazy after all these years. You made me right the lights. Don't try to save me. You may be wrong for all I know, but you may be right. God, beautiful song. Don't go changing to try and please me. You never let me down before. Oh, don't imagine you're too familiar, and I don't see you anymore. Oh, I would not leave you in times of trouble. This I promise from the heart. Oh, I took the good time, I'll take the bad time. I love you just the way you are. Billy Joel, how does that make Billy Joel wrote that beautiful, beautiful love song for his wife. And after he wrote her that song, he divorced her. And he married Christy Brinkley. And then he divorced her. He must be crazy. And here's to you, Mrs. Robinson. Jesus loves you more than you will know. Whoa, 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 Michael. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Larson on the piano. Whoa, wait a minute. See, now this was stunning to me. With my upbringing in the Bronx and in Israel, that a nice Jewish boy like Paul Simon could write a song using the name Robinson. No, Jesus. The fish was this big. Take your time. No, but when you think about it, I mean, you know, Jesus was Jewish, right? He lived at home until he was 30. His mother thought he was God. And he thought she was a virgin. God bless you, please, Mrs. Robinson. Heaven holds a place for those who pray. Hey, 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 hey. Hey, Mr. Tambourine Man, play a song for me. In the jingle jangle morning I'll come following you. How many roads must a man walk down before you call him a man? Yes, and how many seas must the white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? Yes, and how many times must the cannonballs fly before they're forever banned? The answer, my friends, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. Boy, Bob Dylan, huh? What a genius. Greatest songwriter of all time. You know, Bob Dylan was born a nice Jewish boy named Robbie Zimmerman. And one day, he found Jesus Christ, and he converted to Christianity. And then one day, he lost Jesus Christ, and he converted back to Judaism. And then he found him again. And we lost him again. I think it's time for Bobby to buy himself a GPS. Some folks like to get away, take a holiday from the neighborhood. Hop a flight to Miami Beach or to Hollywood. But I'm taking a Greyhound on the Hudson River line. I'm in a New York state of mind. Whoa, it was so easy living day by day, out of touch with the rhythm and the blues. But now I need a little give and take. New York Times, the Daily News. Whoa, it comes down to reality, and it's fine with me, 'cause I've let it slide. I don't care if it's Chinatown or on Riverside. I don't have any reasons, I've left them all behind, 'cause I'm in a New York state of mind. Whoa, yeah, 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 Hey, Michael, come down. Thank you. A New York state of mind. Boy, when you think about it, that song is really a very Jewish song, isn't it? And all the references to, Miami Beach and Hollywood, Riverside Drive. I mean, what could be more Jewish than Chinatown? So the year was 1977, and I was in a New York state of mind. I'd graduated high school in Israel, did several professional shows, decided to come back to the United States of America and pursue my career where I left off. I decided to make a little pit stop to go get my degree in theater. I could have gone to pretty much almost any school in the United States of America. My grades were that good. Where did I go? Miami! The Magic City! Suntan U. It was beautiful, it was great. I graduated in 1980. I did several shows locally, and that's when I got the call. The famous Yiddish actors Ben Bonis and Mina Byrne had heard that young boy from 1969 was back in the States, still spoke Yiddish, still wanted to be an actor. They tracked me down in Florida, and they asked me if I would be willing to move to New York to play the lead role in their upcoming production of a show called The Blacksmith's Daughter. So, I don't think I'm right for the lead role. But they went on to explain, that it was another typical Yiddish melodrama, the old country, 1880s. The daughter of a blacksmith falls in love with a young man. A handsome young man. Very handsome young man. The father doesn't approve. It's a comedy of errors. Eventually they work it out. Of course, there's a wedding at the end. Every Jewish show has to have a wedding. How could I say no? My first professional job in the New York theater as an adult in the Yiddish theater. I packed my bags. I moved to New York. I came to the first day of rehearsal. I was so excited. And Ben Bonis comes walking up to me. And he was a very distinguished gentleman. He must have been close to 80 years old at the time. And he walks up and he says, Avremel, it's so good to see you. Listen, I have to talk to you. I've been thinking, I'm not sure that my audience is ready to see a show where I am not playing the lead role. So I have decided that I am going to play the young men. And you, my friend, you are going to play a small but very important role of the 80-year-old booksellers. I was 23. He was 80. They put me in a gray wig with lots of makeup. I had to carry this huge wagon onto the stage stacked with books. I'll never forget my entry line. Bücher! Books! Wer will kaufen meine Bücher? Who wants to buy my books? And that, my friends, that is what killed the Yiddish theater. But the Yiddish theater didn't die. And because I did that show, several people heard about me in the New York theater scene, and that's when I got the call. They were putting together a tribute on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the famous Yiddish newspaper, the Vorwärts, the Forward. And it was all young people doing old material in a very new and contemporary way. And it was very exciting. And it became what I believe is the first modern revolution in the Yiddish theater. A show called The Golden Land. Beautiful show. We did hundreds and hundreds of performances over a period of about 4.5 years. All over North America. It was a huge hit. Rave reviews. I even got to perform at the Kennedy Center in Washington for President Ronald Reagan. But that show is where I got to meet people who became my friends for life. People like Michael Larson, right here. Long time. I got to work with some of the most amazing talent in New York City. People like the great Bruce Adler. Oliver Sholem, he passed away a few years ago. What an extraordinary talent. He taught me so much. Everybody came to see the show. Everybody loved it. Molly Pecan came to see the show. I mean, I thought I knew a lot about Jewish culture because of my upbringing. But when I did The Golden Land, I realized how little I actually knew about that immigrant experience, the stories from the 1880s to the 1940s, the incredible music and comedy. I mean, The Golden Land was truly a revelation. Bye, 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 W-E-V-D. Bye, 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 W-E-V-D. Bye, 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 bye. Every Sunday morning over WEVD. This is WEVD, Deb's Radio, the station that speaks your language. Good morning. Now for the weather report. Today the weather is nicht dahin and nicht daher. If you didn't understand that, ask the people next to you, they will explain this to you. You want to know if it's raining? I can't tell you because there's no window here in the studio. So stick your head out your own window, and then you will know. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have with us in the studio today one of the great Jewish comedians, one of the incredible Yiddish vaudevillians. Please welcome Mr. Menashe Skolnick. kennt mich nicht, you don't recognize me. Das bin ich, this is me, Menashe Skolnick. You know, when God created the woman, He made for her a beautiful body, oh, a beautiful face, beautiful eyes, a beautiful nose, a beautiful mouth. And then he put a tongue in it and he swirled the whole damn thing. You know, one day I came home to my father and I said, this is the girl that I want to marry. My father took a look at her and he said, Menashe, you can't marry this girl because this girl, she's your sister. I said, you mean it? He said, yes. So I went out. I found another girl. I fell in love. I brought her home to meet my father and I said, this is the girl that I want to marry. My father took a look on her and he said, Menashe, you can't marry this girl either because this girl, she's also your sister. So I became angry, very angry. I ran to my mother and I said, Man, what kind of a husband did you take? Every girl I bring home, he says, I can't marry the girl because the girl is my sister. But you know, Yiddish mom is all my mother. She said, Menashe, sorg sich nicht, Bubale, don't worry, sweetie pie. You marry whoever you want. He is not your father. Anybody need a translation? But finally, I did get married. And after I got married, I had to find a job. It shouldn't happen to a dog. What's happened to me? It shouldn't happen to a dog. What's happened to me? So I was working as a waiter in a restaurant. Comes in a customer and he asks me for a piece fish. So I go into the kitchen, I bring him out the fish. So the customer says to me, yesterday you didn't have no fish. And I say, that's impossible, because this piece fish has been here for over a month. So they fired me. And was it my fault? Then I got a job working in a factory. But the foreman, he didn't like me. You know what a foreman is? A foreman is a guy that doesn't do any work. He doesn't work. He just watches. He watches everybody else should be working. So I think the foreman was jealous of me because everybody thought that I was the foreman. Take your time. So they fired me. I mean, was it my fault? Then I got a job working in a grocery for $18 a week. I could have gotten a job for $20 a week, but I figured if I get fired again, why should I lose $20? It shouldn't happen to a dog. What's happened to me? That's all. And then there was one song in the Golden Land that probably became one of my favorite songs of all time. They used to tell me I was building a dream, and so I followed the mob. When there was earth to plow or guns to bear, I was always there, right there on the job. used to tell me I was building a dream with peace and glory ahead. Why should I be standing online, just waiting for bread? Once I built a railroad, made it run, made it race against time. Once I built a railroad, now it's done. Hey brother, can you spare a dime? Once I built a tower to the sun, brick and rivet and lime. Once I built a tower, now it's done. Brother, can you spare a dime? Once in khaki suits, gee, we looked swell, full of that Yankee doodly-dum. 500,000 boots went slogging through hell, and I was the kid with the drum. And say, don't you remember, they called me Al. It was Al all the time. Say, don't you remember, I'm your pal. Say, brother, can you spare a dime? Thank you. Golden Land. Oh my God, the Golden Land was such an amazing, amazing experience. And because I did the Golden Land, more and more people heard about me in the New York theater scene. And that's when I got the call. They were doing a world premiere musical at the 92nd Street Y on Lexington Avenue, based on one of the greatest Jewish American novels ever written. In 1917, by the great editor of The Forward, Abraham Kahan. The novel and the musical were called The Rise of David Levinsky. And a very dear friend of mine called to tell me that I had to go audition for that show because I was perfect for one of the two starring roles. The young David Levinsky. I mean, he was a young man. A handsome young man. Very handsome young man. A Talmudic prodigy being groomed to become one of the greatest rabbis of all time. A brilliant, brilliant young man, very competitive. He wanted to memorize the entire Talmud by heart. And one day, he wakes up to find that his parents are killed in a pogrom. Questioning everything, his very faith. He decides to leave the old country behind in that first wave of immigrants in the 1880s to come to America, to the Golden Land, with 4 cents in his pocket to try and start a new life. I auditioned with that song, Brother, Can You Spare a Dime? And I got the part. This was my first big break in the New York theater scene. The starring role in what was to become the biggest off-Broadway production of its time. And it was told in a very unique way because there were two Levinskys, the young one and the older Levinsky, who shared the stage almost the entire show. And they ended up casting a big Broadway star of the time. I'm sure some of you remember him. His name was Larry Kurt. He was the original Tony in West Side Story. He was Bobby in Sondheim's Company. I mean, there we were. Our names above the title. And can you imagine a young actor in New York opening the New York Times and seeing Larry Kurt and Avi Hoffman in The Rise of David Levinsky? Oh, what an amazing thrill. Satan tempts me every day, laughing in my face, standing in my way. Satan knows me very well, but now at last I found the way to send him straight to hell. I will be the one, I will be the best, when I know 500 pages more than all the rest. I will win the prize, nobody but me, when I know 500 pages. Just you wait and see. Hard times, nothing to do, all the doors keep slamming in my face. The city streets are windy and cold as I wander place to place. I wonder when this winter will end, whether spring will bring a little hope. Will I wake up suddenly with the answer? I've got a credit face to get me any place. A face that people trust, a face that people trust, and when I ask they must agree to anything I say. Now what I didn't mention is that this young, moral, ethical, Talmudic student from the old country comes to America. And he becomes a businessman, losing his morals, his ethics, as he steps on everybody up that ladder of success to become the greatest garment manufacturer in the United States of America. A true corporate industrialist. I'm reading Herbert Spencer and Darwin, and they say that life is like a jungle and man a beast of prey. The struggle for existence, the battle to survive, the endless competition, the few who stay alive, the strongest, the smartest, the quickest, the best, are fit to survive, and to hell with the rest. The lion is sure of the pick of the feast, for no one will challenge the king of the beasts. The origin of species, it says in black and white. You'll soon be dead and buried unless you win the fight. Survival of the fittest, that's what it's all about. The winners get their dinners, the losers go without. So why shouldn't I make this whole industry mine? I'm trying it out and it fits me just fine. I'm one of the fittest, this style is okay. So all of you misfits, stay out of my way. Rise of David Levinsky. Oh God, I love that show. My first big break in the New York theater scene. Every agent in New York City suddenly wanted to represent me. Every casting director in New York wanted to meet me. The reviews were unanimous raves. And the show closed in a month. And the agent said, oh, well, you know, let us know the next time you're in something, all right? Stay in touch. And I learned firsthand the very, very fickle nature of this business called show. 25 years later, I actually got to play the older Levinsky in a production down in Florida. And who knows, maybe one of these days, I will bring that show back to New York, and I'll get to play the older Levinsky on Broadway. What do you think? Good idea? Yeah. All of you applauding, I know you want to invest in the show. So just come see me after, bring your checkbooks. Anyway, the show closed, and I became just another Jewish actor looking for a job. But because I had done several shows with Jewish content, I actually became the go-to Jew. Whenever anybody needed a Jew for anything in New York, that's when I got the call. I played a Jew in the off-Broadway revival of Milk and Honey. I played a Jew in a show called The Immigrant. I even played a Jew in a show called It's Hard to Be a Jew. And it was getting harder and harder all the time. God, 30-odd years ago, I read an autobiography by Charles Grodin. He's a nice Jewish boy from Pittsburgh. Yeah, he wrote about his life in show business. And he wrote something that has stuck with me all these years. He said, to make it in show business, to become truly successful in show business, all you need is 24 big breaks. And that's when I got my second big break. I saw my old mama at the condominium. She said that I looked old and overweight. And then she told me that she loved me. And we cried some bitter tears. Still Jewish after all these years. Oh, still Jewish after all these years. What is it about Jewish mothers? Ladies, maybe some of you can explain this to me. To this day, when I go visit my mother in Riverdale, she opens the door, she takes one look at me and she says, "Oi, look at you. You're so fat. You want some steak and potatoes?" Now, my mother is an extraordinary woman. For the past 25 years, she has actually been the professor of the Yiddish language at Columbia University, right here in New York. For 30 years, she's written a weekly column every week for 30 years in Yiddish in the Vorwärts, in the Yiddish newspaper. And she's also a playwright in her own right. She's had many plays produced, award-winning plays all over the world, many of which I've had the opportunity to work with her on. So the year was 1988, and that's when my mother got the call. It was Joseph Papp from the New York Shakespeare Festival, the public theater down on Lafayette Street, who had suddenly rediscovered his Jewishness. You know what his real name was, right? Anybody? Yossel Papirovsky became Joseph Papp. He calls my mother at Columbia. He says, "I want you to come down and teach me some Yiddish. And while you're at it, I want you to teach some Yiddish songs to my dear friend, a young actor named Mandy Patinkin." She couldn't go alone. She needed protection. So I went down with my mother to meet Joseph Papp and Mandy Patinkin, and it was quite extraordinary. Joseph Papp was an extraordinarily powerful personality. And we invited him to come see the opening night of this little show that we were working on at the Riverdale Y. And he says, "Yeah, sure, set aside 2 seats for me on the aisle, I'll be there." Yeah. That show, I believe, became the second modern revolution in the Yiddish theater. It was a show called Songs of Paradise. And it was all young people doing all new material in a very new and contemporary way, Yiddish and English mixed together. And the only way I can describe it is the Book of Genesis meets Saturday Night Live. Very sketch comedy. I was the director as well as one of the actors, and I didn't know if the audience, the Yiddish theater audience, would really understand what I was trying to accomplish. I was very nervous opening night, and then somebody comes to tell me that Joe Papp has arrived, and he's sitting on the aisle. I thought I was going to die. The curtain went up, and we started the show. And within a few minutes, the audience really started to get it. They started to giggle and laugh more and more. And by the end of the show, we got this rousing standing ovation. And Joseph Papp stands up. He comes walking down the aisle. He comes up onto the stage. He shakes all of our hands. And he turns to the audience and he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Joseph Papp. And I love this show so much that I've decided I'm going to move it to my theater, the Public Theater, next month." I thought I had died and gone to theater heaven. We opened a month later at the New York Shakespeare Festival, and we became a hit. We ran sold out for months. Everybody came to the show. Theo Bickel and Lou Jacoby, Stiller and Mira came to see the show. Everybody loved the show. The reviews were raves. Jackie Mason. I thought he was one of the funniest men on the planet. I was so excited to meet him. After the show, I came up to him. I said, Jackie, did you like the show? Please, be honest with me. Tell me the truth. Have you liked the show? And Jackie looked at me and said, "Oh." Avi, it's a beautiful show, a beautiful show, a beautiful show. I like the acting, I like the singing, I like the dancing, I like the music, I like the sets, I like the props. I like the whole thing, but I gotta tell you, it's a little too Jewish. Which, coming from Jackie Mason, I took as a compliment. I mean, there I was at the Public Theater. Joseph Papp loved our show. He came to see it over and over. The reviews were raves. Everybody loved it. Joe Papp said I was #1. I thought, that's it, my career is made. The man who had discovered some of the greatest stars of stage and screen suddenly loved my work. And then Joe got very, very ill, very, very quickly. And he passed away, all of a sudden. I know he's smiling down at me from theater heaven. But another big break just kind of came and went. And at this point, I had done so many Jewish, Yiddish-oriented shows that I went from being the go-to Jew to being that guy who was a little, too Jewish. So I thought, you know what, I'm not going to stand for that. I'm going to change my name. And I'm going to start a whole new career as a Goyish actor. A Gentile actor. I had a name all picked out for myself. I was going to call myself Teddy Wayne. Theodore. Why Teddy Wayne? So they sent me out to audition for the TV show Law and Order, which I'm sure you've all seen at some point. The description of the role that I was sent out for was Benjamin the Zloby Jew. Swear to God. I'm not making this up. Which, if I were auditioning for today, perfect. But back then, you know, I was a young man. A handsome young man. Very handsome young man. I was tall. I had hair. Long hair, as a matter of fact. I had a rock and roll band. We used to play in the village. It was great. So I show up to the audition looking like a rock and roller. And Ed Sheeran, the director, takes one look at me. He says, "What role did they send you in for?" I said, "Benjamin, the schlubby Jew." He said, "What are they, crazy? You don't even look Jewish. You look like a rock and roller. You look like a rock and roll manager. You look like Teddy Wayne." And that's how I got to play Teddy Wayne on the series Law and Order, which was great, but it was only one episode. I still get residual checks every quarter, $3.62, sometimes less. So I couldn't exactly retire, so I had to try and find more non-Jewish work, and nobody really wanted to give me a chance. But eventually somebody took a risk, and they ended up casting me in maybe the most non-Jewish show ever written. Jacques Brel is alive and well and living in Paris. And I thought, that's it. I'm going to change my name to Jacques. Or maybe Jackie. And if one day I should become a singer with a Spanish bum who sings for women of great virtue, I'd sing to them with a guitar I borrowed from a coffee bar. Well, what you don't know doesn't hurt you. My name would be Antonio, and all my bridges I would burn. And if I gave them some, they'd know I expect something in return. I'd have to get drunk every night to talk about virility with some old grandmother who might be decked out like a Christmas tree. And though pink elephants I'd see, though I'd be drunk as I could be, I'd sing the song they sang to me about the time they called me Jackie. If I could be for only an hour, if I could be for an hour every day, if I could be for just one little hour, cute, cute, cute. She was as beautiful as rainbows in the sky. She was so beautiful and not at all am I. She was. She lay there on the sand, as gold as she was brown. And when I held her hand, I held the world around. I was so crazy then to think that it could be. I thought that I was hers. I believed she was for me. No, we never learn till it's too late. I can see them now, clutching a handkerchief and blowing me a kiss, discreetly asking how. How come he died so young, or was he very old? Is the body still warm? Is it already cold? All doors are open wide, they poke around inside. My desk, my drawers, my trunk, there's nothing left to hide. Some love letters are there, and an old photograph. They've laid my poor soul bare, and all they do is laugh. Ha, 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 ha. The middle class are just like pigs. The older they get, the dumber they get. be all-knowing with my beard so long and flowing. If I became deaf, dumb, and blind because I pitied all mankind, broke my heart to make things right, then I know that every single night, when my angelic work was through, the angels and the devil too would sing my childhood song to me about the time they called me Jackie. If I could be for only an hour, if I could be for an hour every day, if I could be for just one stinking hour, cute, 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 in a stupid ass way. Brel was great, but it closed. So I had to try to find more non-Jewish work, and it was impossible. Nobody wanted to hire me. So they dragged me kicking and screaming back into the Jewish world. And at this point, I had done so many Jewish shows that I was too Jewish even for the Jews. The only shows that I could get cast in at that point were things like The King of Schnorrers. Yeah, I did that show. Or Meshuggah Nuns. And then the pinnacle of my career, I got to play Tevye. Not in Fiddler on the Roof, mind you. No. Tevye in Tevye, the musical. The sequel to Fiddler on the Roof. What, you never heard of it? I'm shocked. It was such a big success. Yeah, my career was going nowhere fast. And that's when I got the call. The Emmy Award-winning actor Five-ish Finkel was putting together a show based on his life in the Jewish vaudeville. He called me up, asked me if I would be a part of it. How could I say no? I needed the work desperately. It was called Finkel's Follies. And that show changed my life. Not because it was such a great show, not because the reviews were great or it ran for so long, but there was an actress in the show and she was fired. Now, why would this change my life? Because she was replaced by an actress who worked on Broadway with Sid Caesar and Imogene Coca. You may remember her as Laura Turnbull. Yeah, I know her as Mrs. Avi Hoffman. But we fell in love, we decided to get married, we decided to have a child, and Laura was pregnant with our first daughter. And everything was great, except for one little problem. I couldn't get a job. For the life of me, nobody wanted to hire me. We were desperate, deep in debt. My credit cards were maxed out. We were evicted from an illegal sublet on the Upper East Side. Things were really bad. And I went to a producer friend of mine who managed several theaters on 42nd Street, and I begged him for a job, any job. And he said, why don't you go home and write a show? I said, write a show? I never wrote a show. He said, well, you know, write what you know. Well, what did I know? I knew that I was a child of Holocaust survivors who had grown up in a very Jewish, Yiddish environment, beautiful, rich culture. I knew that I had tried to run away from my Jewishness. And so I turned around and I embraced my Jewish identity. And I wrote a little show and I gave it a funny little name. I called it Avi Hoffman's Too Jewish. And that show really changed my life. I opened it in 1994, and since then I've done over 3,000 performances all over North America. I've won several awards and many nominations. I got picked up for broadcast on national public television. I mean, to think that millions of people have seen my little show. The reviews were raves. It was a big hit. But in spite of the success of that show, I still couldn't get past the stereotype. I mean, now, I was literally too Jewish for the New York theater industry. But I wasn't too Jewish for Florida. So just like Tevye ran away from Anatevka and Fiddler on the Roof, I ran away from New York. I was too tired, too tired of being too Jewish. So we moved to the Magic City. I opened my show in the Meshuggah land of hanging chads. And we broke all attendance records. 80,000 people came to see my show in 1 year. We started a whole new life. In 1998, my second daughter was born, and I wrote a sequel to the show, and I called it Too Jewish 2. And that show got picked up for broadcast on PBS. And I made plans to bring it to New York. Everything was great. Except that my father suddenly had to have emergency bypass surgery, and because of some very serious health complications, he was paralyzed from the waist down. He came to see the show at Playhouse 91 on the east side, and there was no elevators, so we had to carry him up the stairs in his wheelchair. God, he loved the show. Everybody loved the show. The New York Times called me a sage. But the man who was my sage, my support system, was slowly deteriorating, and there was nothing that I or anybody else could do about it. And in 2001, I was doing my show very successfully in Los Angeles. I actually won the very prestigious Ovation Award for Best Actor in a Musical. David Hyde Pierce himself handed out my award. And that's when I got the call that I didn't want to get. My mother called to tell me that my father had lost consciousness and that the end was near and I needed to come say my goodbyes. It was the next to the last week of performances in LA, and I took the red eye on a Sunday night, and I arrived at my parents' home in Riverdale on Monday morning. I sat by my father's side, and I held his hand, and I told him stories. Every story that I could possibly think of, about my life, about my family, about my career. I sang him songs, every Yiddish song that he ever loved. He didn't wake up. All day Monday, most of the day Tuesday. And then on Tuesday afternoon, something very, very strange happened, which at the time I thought was a miracle. But I've been told since that it's actually quite common. My father, who had been unconscious for several days, suddenly opened his eyes, and he looked at me, and he was totally and completely lucid. He said, "Avraham, what are you doing here?" I said, "I came to be with you, Tat." He said, "Good, good. How are you feeling?" I said, "I'm okay. How are you?" He said, "I'm all right. I'm a little tired." And we went on to have a conversation, my father and I, the greatest conversation that we ever had. He told me things that he had never talked about his entire life. He told me how he was born and raised in this tiny little village, a little shtetl in the Carpathian Mountains on the border of Hungary and Czechoslovakia, a little shtetl called Apschice. It's a beautiful little Jewish, Orthodox Jewish village. His grandparents, his parents, his siblings, uncles, aunts, friends, relatives, a beautiful little Jewish world. And then one day, the Nazis came, and they took everyone and put them in cattle cars and sent them off to Auschwitz. He told me how they arrived at Auschwitz. Those who had survived the trip were taken to the selection, and most of his family were sent that way, and he was young and strong. They sent him the other direction. And he watched as most of his family, most of his village, most of his world walked towards the chimneys. He told me how towards the end of the war, those who were still strong enough to walk were taken on a death march. And they walked for hours and hours and hours. And they ended up at the edge of a ravine, and they lined everybody up and they shot them. And they just shot them. And my father fell into the ravine. He was very lucky. He was shot in the shin, and he fell in and pretended to be dead. And he waited until it was dark, until it was quiet. And then, with his last ounce of strength, my father clawed his way out of this mountain of flesh. And he found a little trail, and he crawled on the trail, and he saw a house, and he knocked on the door, and the door opened. And there were these two righteous Gentile women who took him in and saved his life. He had never talked about any of this. I didn't know. We talked about how he came to America after the war, went to the army, got a degree, started a business, was quite successful, met my mother. I was born. We moved to Israel, my brother was born. And how he had lived a long and productive and good life. And then he told me how much he loved watching me perform on stage. And that he approved of what I had chosen to do with my life. And then he looked at me and he said, Avraham, I'm getting a little tired. I think I'll take a nap. I said, okay, Tat. I'll talk to you soon, all right? He said, sure. And he closed his eyes. And he went to sleep. And the next day I had to go back to Los Angeles to finish out the last week of my performances. And a few days later, my mother called to tell me that my dear, dear father, Mendel Hirsch Hoffman, had passed away January 18th, 2001. Olav Shalom. I had 3 performances left. And I thought, you know, he always used to say, the show must go on, right? So I dedicated my 3 performances to my father. And on Sunday night, after the last performance, I took the red eye. I flew to Florida, which is where the funeral was held on Monday. And on Tuesday morning, the very next day, after my father's funeral, I started rehearsals for my portrayal of Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof at the Hollywood Playhouse in Florida. That Tevye became my father. These are the actual pictures of my father's family in the old country in Upshitze. My great-grandfather, Shmilduvid, my great-grandmother, Sose, my grandparents, Avrom, who I'm named after, and Bluma, my daughter's middle name. These are my father's siblings. Before he was born, an American relative went back, took these pictures. Otherwise, I wouldn't know who these people were. The thatched roof hut with the horse and wagon right outside. I mean, that was my father's life. Anatevka became Upshitze to me. And ever since then, I try to instill in everything that I do that sense of humanity and compassion that was my father, and that my father tried to instill in me, and that I would like to believe that we Jews have been sharing with the world for thousands of years. My father's pride was in his hands, the piano was his soul. I watched in wonder as he played show tunes miles off from rock and roll. What he loved, he taught me. Now music's what I do. And often when I'm writing in my hands, Dad's there too. If I sing, you are the music. If I fly, you're why I'm good. If my hands can find some magic, you're the one that said they could. When the child who's still inside me finds a song in empty air, when there is joy in making music, it is you who put it there. My dad got old, his hands grew numb. Now he cannot play. I came to visit. He sat and asked me, how could it be this way? I didn't have an answer. I sang this song for him instead. My father sat there smiling, for he knew what it said. If I sing, you are the music. If I love, you taught me how. Every day your heart is beating in the man that I am now. If my ears are tuned to wonder, if when I reach the chords are there, when there is joy in making music, it's a joy that we both share. I never told you, it took time till I could see that if I sing, you are the music, and you'll always sing in me. Yes, you'll always live in me. Hoffman taught me that song. Now I live and work primarily in Florida, and and I've actually gotten to do the kinds of roles that I probably never could have played if I had stayed in New York. Now you'll see in a minute. And the great irony, of course, is that Florida now is suddenly this mecca of film and television production, all these movies and TV shows, series, Burn Notice, Graceland, The Glades, and the incredible, the great Starz Network series, Magic City. Yeah, I love that show. And I say great only because it takes place in Miami Beach in 1960, right back where I started. And I'm very honored to actually have a recurring role on that series opposite the star of the show, Mr. Jeffrey Dean Morgan. And believe it or not, I play a Jew. A Jewish lawyer named Sid Raskin. I mean, who ever heard of a Jewish lawyer? But now being Jewish to me, it's more than just a faith or a culture. It's a big part of who and what I am. You know, with all the joy and all the ambiguity that comes with it. And, you know, now here I am, back in New York, 15 years later, ready to start all over again. Hopefully a little older, maybe a little wiser. And I have to ask you a very important question, but I'd like an honest answer, please. Do you think this tie makes me look too Jewish? So I would like to reassure all of you here tonight that no matter what I do from here on in, whether it's Jewish or not Jewish, I've always been, I am now, and I always will be, still Jewish after all these years. My way up a mountain, a summit that had to be won. I turned my eyes to the top of the mountain, and I was made blind by the sun. Back in the valley, despite all my loneliness, though I was never content, still I had savored the pleasures life held, but I somehow forgot what that meant. All the pushing and pulling and scratching and scraping, I never took time to be free. Caught in a windstorm of working and worry, I never took time to be me. Never took time to be me. Something familiar, something peculiar, something for everyone, a comedy tonight. No royal curse, no Trojan horse, and a happy ending, of course. Goodness and badness, man in his madness. This time it all turns out alright. Tragedy tomorrow. Care about expensive things, cashmere coats, diamond rings don't mean a thing. All I care about is love.
He cares about his love.
Give me two eyes of blue, softly saying, I need you. Let me see her standing there. Honest mister, I'm a millionaire. Now you may think that I'm talking about physical love. Well, I'm not. Not just physical love. There are other kinds of love, like love of justice, love of legal procedure, love of lending a hand to someone who really needs you, love of your fellow man. That's the kind of love that I'm talking about. And physical love ain't so bad either. Styles keep a-changing, the world's rearranging, but Michael, you're timeless to me. Hemlines are shorter, a beer costs a quarter, but time cannot take what comes free. You're like a stinky old cheese, babe.
What?
Just getting riper with age.
Nice.
You're like a fatal disease, babe.
That's me.
But there's no cure, so let this fever rage.
You'll always hit the spot, big shot.
Oh yeah, sure.
You're timeless to me.
Alright, fine. You'll always be du jour, mon amour.
Oh, you
You're
French,
timeless to me. Ooh la la la.
I love that. I love it. I love it. You'll always be first string.
Ring-a-ding-ding.
Watch it.
You're timeless to me. Sing it to me, Michael.
You're timeless to me.
Alright, now it's my turn with a French accent. You're timeless to me.
I'm going to faint.
You're timeless. In the Torah it says that at the end of every day of creation, God looked down on what He created, and God saw that it was good. Except when God created man. That is the only time in creation when God says nothing. And why? Because God gave man the choice to be good. Man's fate is in man's hands. We have to choose to be good. And we do have that choice. Even Hitler, Yemach Shmo, had that choice. God's ways are very hard to understand. But know that there is an explanation for everything. Every day I pray for understanding. Here as I stand at the top of the mountain, I've slowly recovered my sight. Look where I've come from, the fog has been lifted by all I've remembered tonight. All I've remembered tonight. I know I'll always be bound by my history, bound with invisible rope, holding me back, yes, but guiding me onward and giving me reason to hope. I will go on and I'll live every day with a dream that a boy once began. Someday I'll find what I've always desired, and the boy will make peace with the man. Someday I'll find what I've always desired, and the boy will make peace with the
It's for you.
man. Thank you so much. Well, again, we talked tonight. Michael Morrison!